Welcome to Colors of the Dark. I'm your co-host, Rebekah McKendry, and with me, wearing a snazzy Burb shirt. I think I got you that for your birthday one year, maybe
many
Christmas.
years ago.
That was like a decade ago. Yeah, is Elric Kane.
It's my only shirt.
It's your only one. You know, somebody on our new YouTube page, because this show has now come to YouTube, which is awesome, had kind of challenged us to wear different t-shirts each show.
I do that anyway. I've never worn the same shirt, I feel like, ever.
Really? I think I could go maybe 15 shows. We're gonna have to get some sponsorship here. Like, I feel like we're gonna have to reach out. Fright Rags, Cavity Colors, you know, we're on YouTube now. We need different shirts. I think I do love
your shirt. Danger Diabolic. I love that.
I realized that it's now like my eyeballs and then eyeballs here, like staring outwards. Yeah. So yeah, it's like double looking at you. But yeah, I've got my Danger Diabolic shirt going tonight. So, which I love this movie. And you've got Burbs, and we're ready to rock with some new films that we saw. And I'm excited to dig in on my summer book reads as well. Plus, we finally got Daniel Kraus on the show. I've been wanting to have him on since literally, it's been like 10 years. I feel like I'd been trying to book him on like Killer POV when Rotters
I think
came
that's
out.
when you first mentioned him. I remember the word Rotters. I didn't remember necessarily his name at the time. Rotters, and then the link later to Shape of Water. He has been your white whale, and today we
finally got him. No, he and I have been talking forever, because after Killer POV, where I had talked about how much I loved Rotters, like he emailed me or messaged me on Twitter and was like, "Thanks for reading my book," and we've been corresponding forever. So finally get to have him on the show today, which is awesome. But first, we watched a couple of fun, new, exciting movies. Shall we kick off with COBWEB?
Yeah, let's kick off with COBWEB, which we had heard. I know it was like a script that got a lot of attention early on by a writer we got to meet at a festival earlier this year, Chris Devlin.
Yep.
Who did the new Chainsaw adaptation, I guess you'd call it, more than a remake.
We hung out with him at the Seattle Film Festival, which was awesome. That was a really fun weekend. And
it was really fun. And I really liked the Chainsaw adaptation. And I just had heard this was a script that got a lot of attention. I didn't know anything about it when I watched it.
Me neither.
And I guess a lot of the comparisons to Barbarian are like correct in the sense of a setup that turns into something else, that turns into something.
It reinvents itself like 4 times.
But that's about it, because Barbarian's a movie that blows the doors off, right? Like from 20 minutes on, it's just like doing something so big in that way. And that's one of the things. COBWEB is quieter and weirder, and at times maybe it doesn't, not all the connections completely work, but I found it to be a bit of more of a sleeper. Like, this is a movie that a lot of people I talked to, I saw somebody who was their favorite movie of the year when I watched it with them. And I think one of the things that made me really notice it was knowing that the director had done the Marianne Netflix show, which is one of the creepiest shows ever, and has a distinct directing style, which sometimes is enough for me, like with certain movies where I'm like, ooh. And you'll see it in like the dream scene in this movie. It's one of the creepiest things I've seen this year.
This sequence for me was one of the scariest things I have seen in years. Like, there were moments in Talk to Me that I felt got close, but that was my takeaway from this movie. Parts of it worked for me, parts of it didn't work. Some of the connective, I love kind of the final act. I thought was a lot of fun. I loved where it went. And so I really dug into that. Some of the connective tissue of, there were certain holes that I was like, but wait, why did they? But that said, that fucking sequence is worth you renting it alone. There is a dream sequence in it that was just it was beautifully shot. It was beautifully directed. The way that the camera worked in it, the hallway sound, it was just, the whole thing was great.
And that reminded me of Marianne, if you like that creepy style. Lizzie Kaplan, and this is really fascinating. But this is a movie that is worth talking about at the top, not just because I think it's one of the better horror films of the year, because I think it's definitely one of the most entertaining things I've seen, because it keeps kind of, like I said, reinventing itself. But it's also just because the release was so strange. It was in theaters, but it would only play
days.
No, it was on for a couple weeks, but it was only playing at 10:30 at night.
11 o'clock at night. Yeah.
And it was
Elric and I kept going to see it, and every single time we looked, it was like, it's still only at 10:30. And then it went down to where it was only playing at one theater in LA, and it was still only at 10:30 at night. And we were like, why would you? That's such just, if you ran it at 8, wouldn't you sell more tickets? Like, it was just a weird choice. So we never ended up seeing it in the theater because 10:30 at night.
No, and there's no way it was being platformed in a way that was getting attention. And then what's craziest is it's a Halloween film. It's literally set at Halloween. And I feel like this movie, I mean, maybe I'll get another life in a couple months, but it just feels like this is an end of September, start of October movie through and through. Every element of it is perfect for that. And it came out, just if people don't realize, it came out the weekend of Oppenheimer and Barbie.
Yeah.
But that's when they decided they would, like, you can't counter program to that weekend because Oppenheimer and Barbie are already counter programmed to each other. So they've got all the bases. So it was just, my heart breaks a little bit for those involved because it's off to a bad start. But it reminds me of your next, not movie wise, but in the feeling of, oh, this movie 10 years from now is going to be way more popular than it is today. It just has all those elements to it.
No, it's got some really good qualities to it, even with the holes that I kind of had questions about. I still walked away saying, okay, this is one of the best I've seen so far this year. So yeah, there's something really fun and charming about where it goes and how it gets there that I really liked. And at no point was I not completely kind of engaged in thinking like, oh my God, I have to see where this goes. And I love how bonkers it gets.
Because it starts, so it basically, and just really quickly for anyone, if you know nothing, it's about a young boy in this family house, and from frame one, you're like, is this their parents, or is this like a sinister type situation? You really don't know what kind of movie you're watching.
His parents just feel really strict and weird. They won't let him go trick-or-treating. He's not allowed to carve pumpkins. There's just a lot of kind of weirdness in the family.
And if it had just stayed in that lane, I don't think I would have loved it. I would have been like, yeah, it's okay. That's how I was feeling at that point in the movie. And then it just kept taking kind of leap upon leap. And by the end, I was like, oh, okay, come on. This is just too fun not to give praise to.
It's $6.99 right now on Amazon. So it's definitely worth checking out. There's some really fun stuff in there. Okay, so did you see something else new?
Well, yeah, I saw a few new ones, but the one more worth putting up the top because another one we were meant to see together, like literally multiple weeks. Then you got sick, and I went yesterday at the end of my day, like where I am, because I didn't want to not see it in a theater because I just had a feeling that it was going to be like a theater thing. And that is another one causing a lot of people mixed results. Last Voyage of Demeter, I'm not sure.
Demeter, I think.
But
I like the way you said it. You put a different emphasis on a syllable. So yeah,
I think you'll really like it. For one,
I know I will. I'm so excited to see this, and I love Andre's work. So.
Yeah, I also kind of felt like people, even though it's not the same movie, it's the kind of movie we don't get very often, which is like Overlord, where it's like kind of big and bold, and when you get to the horror, it's like really crazy. But the horror, I'm kind of surprised. I have some really hardcore horror fans friends who really didn't like this movie. When I'm watching it, it's like I can understand not loving the script and some of the character stuff, especially lead characters and stuff that might just seem a little fake or something. But man, the horror all the way through. There is not a weak shot of the creature. There's not a weak moment that the creature's in. It is an incredible creature design. It's such a great throwback to see a version of Dracula that's creepy, scary, grotesque, just mean. There isn't an ounce of goodness to this thing. It's just pure awfulness. And I thought that was...
Is it CG'd or is it practical?
I'm sure there's CG, like when it's flying or something, but there's a dude in there, who, if you look him up, he's always in a lot of these movies, like even Conjuring movies and things like that. It's such a great looking creature, and it's got Liam Cunningham as the captain, and he's the guy from Game of Thrones, who I thought was very good. And I gotta tell you, sometimes we've known for locally, because he would go to trivia and stuff, but David Dasmalian has obviously been in a lot. But in the last year, like I noticed him before, and I was like, he's good. But in the last year, I mean, I've seen him in like 6 things.
He was in Boogeyman. He's got Late Night with the Devil coming up.
I heard that.
He was in Twin
Boston
Peaks.
Strangler.
As the
baddie. No,
he's
literally
exploded.
And it was just one of those things where you see someone in enough very different roles, like some, where I was like, fuck, he's really freaking good. And so I think he's got a really fun role in this. He's just like the second in command on the ship. But I love the world. It reminded me of that Showtime. What was that FX series on the ship with the kind of Wendigo type thing a couple years ago?
That was, what was the name of that? It was
something.
The Terror.
The Terror. It's kind of like that. It's not quite, I mean, that tone might have suited this even more. Like if this probably could have suited being a one season show like that. And that way you could have had even more time. But there's nothing in it that feels cheap or rushed. And so sometimes when you see reviews, you're like, oh, did you guys see the same thing I just saw? Because that was really freaking fun and well put together and handsomely mounted. So it's like, I don't know, it feels like people have been a bit dismissive. And how often do we get a true like full on Dracula like this. Like, it's a Salem's Lot Dracula, but even more grotesque and even more kind of messed up. I thought it was really cool. Like, again, sometimes there'll be stuff in the scripts where you're like, okay, yeah, it seems a little bit obvious. And but I don't know, I had a really good time with this, and I don't know when the next time I'll get to see. Well, I'll get to see Nosferatu. Robert Eggers is Nosferatu soon enough, I guess.
I
think you'll dig it.
I was really hoping that this would help the plight of period pieces, because any place you go right now, studio wise, that is like the one thing that you hear is no period pieces. And this is pre-strike right now. Nobody's pitching anything, but that was kind of always the thing that you would hear is like, yeah, we're really looking for heart, no period pieces. And that sucks. That's kind of limiting. And
you want all options.
You want all options. And so I was really hoping that this would kind of open that door back up. I was hoping the same. What was that awesome werewolf movie from right at the end of the pandemic that we saw that was a period piece that nobody saw? We were the only ones in the theater.
It was like The Curse or
The Curse stuff.
I still think that the effects in that thing were so rad.
It was so cool. Yeah. And that was
unexpected for the kind of movie it was.
And another period piece that I'd been like, maybe this will change it. And then, nah, it didn't change it.
I actually, funnily, on this topic, I just last night was doing the New Beverly calendar, and they're playing Dead Silence by James Wan. And you had recently rewatched. I did not like that movie at all when it came out, and watched it again a few nights ago, and like
it's
freaking loved it. And I think it's because at the time we wanted a different kind of horror. Like we were kind of getting sick of bigger things and throwbacks, and you just kind of wanted something real and new. And then suddenly you get all this A24 stuff, and you have like 10 years of very much grounded horror. And I was like watching this that night going, oh, this is exactly what I want right now. Like
it's something so fun.
A throwback with period costumes in the for the monster character, for the woman. And
she's like vaudevillian, and we're back in the 1920s, and it's so fun.
No, it is. And that's just further proof that like movies do not change. You might judge a movie at one point, but you will change, and at some point you might come back to a movie and go, oh my god, I love that movie now. And that's always fun. I love that about movies.
Definitely. So I will quickly discuss the TV show that I saw, and then I've got another new movie as well. So I started watching Surreal Estate, which is a really good title. This is on Sci-Fi, and I was led to it because I watched Chucky. Like I love the show Chucky.
Yeah, it's a good
honestly
show,
it's one of my favorite horror TV shows running right now. Especially since Nick Antosca has been working on it. It's great. And so while I was watching it, there was an ad running for another sci-fi show called Surreal Estate, which is about a real estate company who specializes in haunted houses. And the idea is like, you're never going to be able to sell the haunted house, especially if there's been deaths there. If it's, the town legend, if everybody knows about this incredibly fucked up house, you're not going to sell it. You're not going to get the price you want. Let us take care of your problem, and then we'll be your real estate company and sell it for you, which is a hell of a hook. And so I only got a couple episodes into this, but I loved it because it's a procedural show in that each week they're kind of with a different client and a different ghost and a different scenario and a different house, but it's these real estate agents, and there's just something so fun to it. It's got a darkly comedic tone. So I won't say kind of where it goes because I'm only 3 episodes in, but I will continue watching this because I've really enjoyed the first couple of episodes. I apparently just got renewed for a second season, which was one of the things that I read this week. But it's fun.
Is Sci-Fi, because some people, is Sci-Fi go on Peacock? Is that where because I found Chucky on Peacock.
I watched these and this is such like convoluted streaming talk. Through my Roku, I have a Sci-Fi app, and that's where I watch Chucky, and that's where I found this as well.
I have a Peacock account in Iceland that I reroute using my we're too nerdy, but I do think some of that maybe ends up on I mean, you need to literally have 100 channels to watch 3 shows now. So
it's true. I need one thing where everything goes there, but I hoped that was my Roku, where I now have all these apps on my Roku, but still that doesn't work because certain things will be on the Paramount app on my Roku, but then it's different from Paramount Plus. And same, like I've got my NBC, but then that's different from Peacock. It's like, it's all kind of, I still don't know where anything goes. I just have to search for everything. And then they change, like where From was changed
Oh yeah,
as it went to the
changed.
second season. And I was like, it was on Epix. And now I think
Yeah.
it's on, I don't even remember where it was last season. Yeah, I can't keep up. I just search and then I watch and that's it. And then I forget that I joined Paramount Plus. And then, $100 some later, I'm suddenly like, wait, I own Paramount Plus. What? So yeah, but Surreal Estate, if you've been kind of missing Evil in its downtime, God, I keep thinking, I need the strike to end just for Evil because it's not getting made right now. I need Evil to come back.
Forget your own career. You just want Evil.
I need Evil and From back immediately. No, fight the good fight, go strike. But yeah, I need Evil and From back, y'all. But if you're kind of missing Evil while it's on hiatus, Surreal Estate was a nice little band-aid for that.
Speaking of streamers, this was interesting because there was a movie that I'd heard good things about and I was excited to see it. And then I saw the poster, not to diss on the poster, but just sometimes whatever cover art, not even the poster, the art that ends up on the streamer, you know what I mean? The little box art. And that was a movie called The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster. Which was interesting because it's actually Crypt TV, even though I know it's going to be on Shudder eventually because it says Shudder. It's actually developed through Crypt TV, which is interesting because I don't know if they've had many features yet because they specialize in shorts.
Yeah, I've seen oodles of their short films. They have great stuff, but yeah, I don't recall any features.
Initially, I really wanted to see this, and then I just kind of time passed, and I was like, oh, I forgot to see it, and you don't get to it. My friend Dick kept saying it's a great movie, and I was like, okay, got to watch it. Watched it this weekend. Fantastic filmmaking. This is one of those movies where if you watch Horror Noir, the great documentary about black horror filmmakers, this is the kind of movie where you're like, this is a next generation film. It's not just that it's a good horror film, it's just a really, really well directed film. It has real vision, real voice, because the voices, it felt to me like if Spike Lee's like second movie after She's Gotta Have It was a small independent horror film, it feels like it would be like this because the voices of the characters, it's this very brainy young girl who goes to a school across town, not in her neighborhood, where so everyone makes fun of her going to like the white fancy school because she wants to be a scientist. She's really brilliant. She goes to the school, she's having troubles there because she is smarter than her teachers basically, and she has this theory that she's talking about in voiceover at the start, which is basically that death is a disease, and if it's a disease, then it can be cured. And I want to cure it because everyone in my neighborhood keeps being shot to death by gang violence and each other. And her brother has just died when the movie opens, and it literally opens with his dead body being dragged out of frame because she is collecting bodies in this like locker area and just experimenting. It's just a Frankenstein story, but it's done in a way that just, if this had not been well directed, I probably would have gone, oh, it was a cool attempt at doing it. But it's so well directed. Bomani J. Story, someone I don't know, first time seeing and stuff, that I was just, you're just in. You'll like, trust me, it's one of those ones where I look at the art and it's her holding a button and it's just like, oh, is this going to be a kid's thing or something? I didn't know what it was going to be. It's very adult.
I thought it was kind of more kids versus aliens, YA.
Yeah, total opposite.
Bonkersness.
Yeah,
okay, wow.
It's like girl in the hood taking on the hood with her monster, but in a way that's done through a serious vein. But it's never preachy. You know how movies can actually say something but not be preachy, and it's a tough line. I think a lot of people fail when they try to do that, and this film's able to do it. I don't know. It's just one of the better films. It almost transcends just whether it's horror or not, because it's a mixture of that and kind of social drama. But it's a really good movie, and if I can help other people get over the hump of being like, I don't need to see it. Like, trust me, this should be in your year's best conversation. So Angry Black Girl, right now I paid to see it, but I like outside of having Shudder, but it had Shudder at the top, so I have to assume it's coming to Shudder at some point.
It was an RLJ release as well. I remember Mark talking about it, so I have a feeling it's heading to Shudder.
Really good. And it's always exciting when you watch this, you're like, oh, this person's gonna make another great movie, so there's no doubt in my mind. So yeah, put it on the list for sure.
Fantastic. So last night I watched The Strays on Netflix. This is a new film that just came, I believe, last Friday. And I had been on a film shoot, not any type of, struck film shoot. It was a documentary film shoot this week. And I was there with a bunch of other horror nerds. And while I was there were a group of people talking about this movie and about how, Netflix, we've talked about this on the show before, how their horror is kind of hit or miss. Like sometimes I'm like, oh my God, this is brilliant, Our House. And then sometimes I'm like, that one kind of fell apart a little bit. But so I had heard a bunch of people talking about this as there's something really interesting to it. So I went home, immediately started watching The Strays. This is a British film. It is about, we open with this woman and she's on the phone and she is clearly at her wit's end. She's crying. She's talking about how she has no more money. She's bankrupt. She doesn't know what to do anymore. She's like, I don't know what to do. I have to get out of here. She slams down the phone, and then cut to, she is now living in a beautiful neighborhood, incredibly wealthy, doing her makeup, has 2 kids, a husband. She's incredibly wealthy. And we don't really know what transpired in between or how she went from like this impoverished lifestyle where she just one day decided, I'm done, I'm getting out of here, to being in this very kind of upper crusty, very white neighborhood. She's African American. And midway, probably like our first act, these two, she lives this very refined life. She lives this very manicured life. She's running charity events. She's an administrator at a really hoity private school, like a charter school. And she just lives this very kind of refined, very exclusive, wealthy life. And then one day, 2 people from her past just kind of show up out of nowhere. And that's when things go off the rails. I won't say any more than that, except that at that point, transitions from kind of being this drama to funny games. Like it gets a little bit more kind of funny games into more of like a psychological torture, and it gets good. I liked where the third act went. It took a while for me to get into this movie, but I did like where the third act went. This is on Netflix now, so yeah, definitely check this one out. It is not horror in the sense of there's going to be, you know, crazy disembowelings at the end. There's no monster that's going to show up. There's not a ghost. It is very much like a psychological torture, like funny game style. But that said, it was a compelling watch. I'm still not sure of the messaging, which was fun. There's definitely some statements in there on race, gentrification, you know, being true to yourself, things like that. But I like the fact that it's 24 hours later and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what the messaging was and how it was coming across. Like you feel it, but it wasn't as clear as I feel like it is in a lot of other films. I didn't walk away from it going, oh, that was a statement on drug addiction, like I did with Talk to Me. So I kind of like that I'm still figuring it out. But even today, when I was in class, because it's on Netflix, like all my students had watched it and immediately were like, oh my gosh, did you watch Strays? And they were really excited to talk about it. So anything that can kind of get people jazzed to talk about horror, I'm in. So not 100% horror, not going to go full horror, but definitely kind of falls in line with more of a psychological torture film by the end. That is The Strays on Netflix right now.
There's one I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on. I don't like to spend too much time if one doesn't connect to me, but there was a brand new Shudder one called Bad Things by Stuart Thorndike, and there's a lot about it. There was like definitely individual moments where I was like, ooh, intrigued, but it never came together for me. And by the end, I was just like, you know, that feeling where you don't believe it, like whatever kind of genre it is, right? If I don't buy it. But there's a couple things worth recommending. It's a group of girls, friends go to a hotel that one of them has just inherited, or it sounds like she's inherited, and her girlfriend is telling her, you know, like, we should keep this and run it, and this could be our new thing. And there's a lot of relationship, a lot of characters have cheated on each other, and it's, you know, that kind of small group of 4 of them here kind of not treating each other the best way. It kind of felt like next gen Shining light, if you know what I mean. So like the actual characters were kind of characters you haven't seen in movies like this that much, and I thought that on that level that was super interesting, and like felt like a very kind of new progressive like viewpoint on a movie. It kind of keeps changing genres. It's set up like I said, The Shining or a supernatural hotel kind of movie, and you'll see these kind of ghost kind of moments. But then at a certain point, it just kind of goes straight slasher for a while, and I was like, so it felt so weirdly indecisive to me that I never really understood why the things were happening. But there is one element that I think for some people might be really worth watching, which is you see these flashbacks to her mother, who keeps saying she's on her way, but we don't, you know, she's not getting to this hotel, and it's played by Molly Ringwald. And,
oh wow!
And so it's pretty interesting, the couple scenes that she's in, and one of them's pretty graphic, kind of messed up. They're really good, and they're really interesting scenes. So it as a whole, it didn't come together, but I also get the feeling sometimes I don't know if I'm the goal for this movie. Like, you know, it might be like someone who's 22 right now might really pick up on some of the things in this movie. So I definitely wanted to still mention it because it is just, I think it just hit. I think it was at Tribeca and then it just hit Shudder. So that's called Bad Things. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that one.
It's on my queue as well as the new Shudder release, Rebirth. Is that what?
Yeah, that hasn't come to Shudder yet. So that's another example.
It's on
it's
the
in
streamers
theaters.
thing.
It's actually in theaters.
Oh,
right
it is.
now.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's because I think it's doing like I think Zimmerman had said it as one of his favorite films he's worked on or something. So I am excited to see that one as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Yeah. Now that one I definitely want to check out. So that takes me to my summer book report, which is what I did a lot of, and we can volley back and forth because I know you have a couple more titles to do. So what I did a lot this summer because I was on strike was read. And I would go camping. I would spend my evenings just reading. And then the other thing that I did was teach summer session at USC. I taught my summer horror boot camp. And I have an hour and a half commute each way because it's only 11 miles. I'll tell people that it's 11 miles, but in LA, that's 90 minutes on the 5. And so
do you have a whistle and short shorts and a Sergeant Slaughter hat? Because I just imagine it's your Bekah's boot camp.
It's Bekah's boot camp. I only call it that because it's so immersive where you're there. You're like with me for like, it's like seriously like 10 hours a week that the students have to spend with me for like 6 weeks straight. And within 6 weeks, they make like 4 different films. So it's real immersive is the only reason I call it that. Is it's like you're thrown in, you're with all of us and you're spending your summer with these people.
So you don't have a whistle is where you're.
I need a whistle.
I
feel like I need that shorty shorts. I don't know if I'm even allowed to wear that as a professor, but I feel like I just need like a Sergeant Slaughter hat. Yeah. That feels like
the hat and whistle would be enough.
But because I spent so much of my summer, 4 days a week commuting, I had all this time to listen to audiobooks as well. So my summer horror book report. I'm going to start with Riley Sager because I basically read every Riley Sager book that comes out. And I had talked about last summer, I read House Across the Lake. And it was Mark Ward from RLJ that kind of got me into Riley Sager to begin with. These are horror adjacent, I'll call them. They're not always straight horror. Some of them are, like House Across the Lake is definitely horror, but they're all really bonkers, sleazy, and thriller, if nothing else. They'll all have like these real strong thriller eds, all real kind of just ephemeral read. It's nothing too heavy. You can read them in a couple of weeks. It's like beach reading. And I will read every single one of his books. So this summer I read The Only One Left and Lock Every Door. The Only One Left is his brand new one. These were okay for me. I really liked Lock Every Door. Dick also agreed with me that this one, Dick Grummer, because I was talking with him about it at trivia. He agreed.
Do we think he's really now the most famous person in the world of podcasts who might not have been on a podcast? Like
why haven't we have him on yet?
I'm never having him on because he's listening. I want him to hear this and have his
Dick, I'm going to have you on just to talk about Riley Sager with me. So.
but I do feel like he's had more mentions than any human ever.
No, I think it's because we both talk with him about books and media all the time.
Well, he's my neighbor, and we watch movies.
And I talk with him about books at trivia and stuff like that. So, Lock Every Door was a really cool setup where it's a woman takes a job working in a high-rise apartment building, and basically everybody in there is weird and nuts, and it slowly kind of unravels. And yeah, there's a really cool twist at the end for this one, but this one was a really tight one. I will mention one more before I throw to you. I listened to both of those, by the way. Those were both audiobooks. I read House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. This is the second book I've read by her. I'd read the Twisted ones during the pandemic. Was actually one of my favorite pandemic reads. And this one just came out, I think, in March. I loved this book, quite possibly one of my favorite of the summer. It's about a woman who is grown off, has her own career. She works as an entomologist. She loses one of her gigs, so she decides to go home and spend the summer with her mother. And she gets there, and her mother is kind of unraveling. And she's not sure if her mom has dementia or if there's something else happening. And then weird stuff starts happening around the house. It is a really cool gothic occult ghost story that takes place in the middle of the suburbs. And so this one, it was really funny as well. Like it's written as a dark comedy. So that is T. Kingfisher, House with Good Bones. This was by far one of my favorites of the summer. I'll throw back to you. And then
let me do a couple. I did have one more movie, but because you got me into the book mood, let me just do my couple that because I was reading when I was traveling, mostly I was reading this biography that I really loved on Michael Cimino, the director of Deer Hunter, and it was just too interesting not to. Sometimes I get lost in, like a biography, but I did read this. I love this cover that only the YouTube listeners will be able to see, but this is probably one of my favorite covers in a very long time.
Catriona Ward is amazing.
Yeah. So the book is called Sundial by Catriona Ward, and I'll tell you, I was at an airport and I would never have known about this book, but the cover was it's like this pink font and a pink, is it a fox or dog? I can't remember.
Like a leopard or a hyena?
No, it's a kind of dog that is part of the story that at some point. But anyway, it's a really interesting, almost like especially at the start, it's almost like a female Dexter setup, because you've got a woman who's worried about her daughter having these issues. She's like, seems like very macabre and, collects bones and all this. So she's worried she's going to hurt her other younger daughter. And there's some reason she believes that, tied to her experiences growing up on this kind of commune type compound place called Sundial. And she takes her daughter back there to deal with this and the kind of the ghosts of the past stuff. And it's just very interesting book, I thought. And that one definitely was, it's always a happy accident when you don't know anything about a book and you just pick it up. And the other one I just started, it's the one I was most excited to read this summer. And it is a guy who's been doing, Michael Wehunt. I've been talking about him a bit. This one's called The Inconsolables. It's his brand new short story. So I just read the first short story, I think, last night. So I'm just diving in. His Greener Pastures is one of my all-time favorite short story collections. He's a writer from Georgia, and he hasn't yet had his not developing short stories, and I think a small novella so far. So excited for when he writes that first, big novel, because he's freaking great.
What was his name again?
His name is Michael Wehunt. He did a short story I really wanted to turn into some sort of crazy movie from his first book called Greener Pastures. And they're all kind of like nature as horror kind of stories. They're all really interesting, very adult. This one I've just cracked open, so I don't know exactly, but so far one really good vampire story at the start. So I just one of those writers to watch if you're into the writers like Tremblay and some of the people we've talked about in the past. Michael's definitely on the level. So but that's my only horror reading. So you go on, and then I'll
do a couple more. So I read Black Tide by Casey Jones. This is total big apocalyptic horror with monsters in it.
Oh, cool.
This one was fun. It wasn't my favorite book of the summer, but it's big bonkers. Like, I'm surprised there hasn't been a movie of this yet, just because it is full apocalypse. It feels giant. And so this one was a fun read. It wasn't real cerebral, but it was just a really fun read. I'll go to The Wicked, which is by...
I like that cover.
Yeah, this is a great cover. By James Newman. This is actually from a press that I love, that I've been working with them, just kind of supporting them online for years, called Apex Press. And I found this book through that 101 horror books to read before you're murdered that I talked about earlier on the show. This was one of the ones mentioned. And so I immediately was like, okay, well, I have to read that. This is like awesome 1980s throwback demon horror about this demon who is basically plaguing a small town. His name is Moloch, or Moloch, I think it's pronounced. And it feels like an 80s film. Like, it felt like Witchboard, like that demon level from Witchboard. So there was just something really, really fun to that one. So I really enjoyed that. And then I'll also talk about, I got a couple left. Mayfly, I'm not exactly sure of the pronunciation, by C.J. Lead. This one I feel like you would really like, because this is basically, it's like a big love letter to Los Angeles from the perspective of a female American psycho. She works at Disney. They never say Disney exactly, but yeah, she works at Disney and has all these kind of wild fantasies, and then it kind of becomes like a female serial killer American psycho, all about Los Angeles as well. Los Angeles is just kind of all over this novel. So yeah, you go, and I'll hit another three. I got a couple more.
Yeah, my last one is a movie that it was just like an interesting one, action thriller genre, brand new movie called God is a Bullet.
I have heard so much about this.
Yeah, had good art. Well, some interesting stuff. It's directed by Nick Cassavetes, John Cassavetes' son, who's been directing movies for last 20 years, and he's made he's made some like really intense kind of like movies like his dad, and he also made The fucking Notebook, a very popular weepy. This is one of those movies that sometimes it's trying too hard to be hardcore. Those movies like where everyone's got facial tattoos and they're Satanists, and The Satanists in this movie look more like Mad Max characters. I don't know if I ever believed them as a actual group of Satanists. But anyway, the idea is you've got the guy Nikolai Coster-Waldau, the guy from Game of Thrones, Jaime Lannister, and he is playing this very lame cop. Who's got an ex-wife and his daughter. There's a very violent opening where his ex-wife is murdered by these intruders, and they steal these Satanists, and they steal his daughter, and that's one of the opening scenes. And
so it's like a Taken.
Yeah, it's Taken, but then it's basically he goes, well, I don't know anything about he's kind of square and he knows nothing about this world. And they're like, it's that's why I don't really believe it's the 8 angle. Like, I wish they weren't Satanists and just like evil cult, but the word Satanist kind of, I think, muddies what they actually do, because there is one cool scene where they're trying to do some sort of sacrifice thing. It's it's the violence in this movie is probably the most violent thing I've seen this year in terms of the scenes that go violent and the kind of the damage to bodies. So on that level, it's actually very entertaining. Anyway, he needs to find help. In the opening scene, a young girl had been kidnapped from the past by the same gang. And then now it cuts to her now, and she is a girl who's in therapy. She has escaped the gang, and it's the reason to watch the movie, which is new queen of all horror cinema, in my opinion, Maika Monroe, who has just been crushing it, from like that one you liked last year, Significant Others, all the way back to It Follows. She is almost unrecognizable. If I didn't see her name, I don't know if I would pick it, because she's so thin. She has tattoos all over her face, a shaved head, and bleached blonde hair. Just, she's this escaped victim from this cult, and she feels bad about what's happened to his kids. So she basically says, I'll help you, because she wants to get revenge on the gang leader, which is very interesting because the gang leader of the cult is played by this actor, Carl Glusman. And the reason why that's significant is because he's her husband in Watcher. Maika Monroe and him, they're the couple, but in this he's totally different. He's like tattooed, a total nightmare of a kind of maniac, Manson-esque kind of dude. And they start going on their journey, and it's so weird because they go to Jamie Foxx is in this movie, suddenly tattooed, one arm. It's a very strange movie because it's like really kind of pushing the hardcore, everything's extreme. And Jamie Foxx is kind of this guy, he's somewhere in between gray area kind of character. He'll help them, but he's also on the side of the bad guys. He's a gun runner, drug pusher kind of dude, and they get all these help. There's all these storylines, but here's the kicker: this movie, which has a plot of 75 to 85 minutes, is 2.5 hours long. And that's why it took me so long to push play, because I was like, wait a minute, what? Like, how can this movie justify? It can't. Like, it has a couple subplots.
Is it sustainable for that long?
Oh, no, the movie, yeah, you can totally watch it, and I enjoy it because it's like, it is so hyper violent and crazy that I found it entertaining in that way. Did I believe it? Not really, at a lot of points, but I did have a lot of fun. But it is too long, and when it's the moments, like if you had read the script, they'll have these they'll be on this mission, this A story to get revenge, basically, and they'll cut back to where the town he's from and some of the backstory of some of the other characters, and you're like, you do not need this shit. And because there's celebrities like January Jones is in one of those stories, you're like, no, all that shit would have had to been cut for this movie to be like streamlined to maybe 90 minutes. I think this would have been an absolute banger. I think even at 2.5, I actually did enjoy it and do recommend it to people who like kind of revenge films, cult movies with crazy Satanists. It's just, it's pretty deplorable.
You just hit a lot of my deplorable.
Yeah. Well, deplorable characters that you can't help but go, yeah, why not? And also Maika Monroe is she's cool. Like, she keeps challenging herself with these like very different types of roles. Like, this is not the girl from Watcher. I don't know. I was surprised, but it's the kind of movie. It's right now I paid to watch it on streaming, but I know 6 months from now it will be the movie that goes on Netflix and is #1 that week. On Netflix, because it'll be like, oh my god, what is the extreme? It's gonna
be like the RRR where it explodes there.
Totally. Not quite. It won't be as popular as that, but you know what I mean. So that's God is a Bullet. Again,
great title as well.
Yeah, and they do say it out loud.
It's the quintessential line.
God is a bullet.
Remember that there was this old SNL sketch where it was like, I'm the person who says the quintessential line. We got to get out of Africa. Now nice. I got to find that sketch somewhere. But yeah,
but that's my last one. But I did like it. I thought it was a cool thriller.
Excellent. Okay, jumping in on a couple of my last summer reads leading up to my favorite one. Yeah. I read, because I know you read the first one, I read the second volume of Nice House on the Lake, which you got to read. I won't get into this because I have to give spoilers from the first book, and the first book is so fucking good. And I loved all the twists in that. And I don't want to give anything away because I definitely didn't see it coming in the first book. But this is just my, hey, Elric, you need to read the second volume of Nice House on the Lake. It's great. It is absolutely great. I read a really cool Lovecraftian, it was 2 novellas put together. So it was a novel, but it was made up of 2 novellas called A Lush and Seething Hell by John Horner Jacobs. And this was super Lovecraftian cosmic horror, but done in a really smart way. The first one was set during the Argentinian War, the Dirty War. And then the second one it was also more historic, but it was just like, it was Lovecraft with never referencing Lovecraft. It was just super cosmic and just really smart the way that it handled it. That was Lush and Seething Hell. This Nana was a novella I picked up. At some point I Googled like good horror novellas you've never heard of, and this came up on it. This is Nana by Mark Taus. I'm really not sure how I even found this. I've never heard of the publisher before, but it was fun. It was about a young boy spending the weekend with his Nana, his grandma. And she tells him that she's going to go take him to this like bingo night is kind of the best way to describe it. It's like a community, like, you know, VFW event with all of her elderly friends. And he's like, oh God, this is going to suck. And it gets all types of fucked up, really fucked up. So this one, surprisingly fun read. And the one that was definitely my favorite book that I read this summer is not a recent one. It was from 2020, is one called The Return by Rachel Harrison. And I've read a couple of Rachel Harrison books at this point, but I absolutely loved this. I listened to this on audiobook, and it was a phenomenal read about a group of friends, really tight-knit group of friends. And one of them just disappears on a hike, just completely disappears. They never find the body. No one really knows what happens. And they have a funeral for her. Everybody just assumes that she's gone. 2 years pass. They move on with their lives. Wake up one morning and she's sitting on the front porch, and she's worse for wear, but she has no memory of anything that happened to her in the 2 years that she was gone, or so she says. And so all of the girls decide, okay, well, we've got to remind her that she's still got friends, that she's part of the group. We're worried about her. She's suffering from depression. Does she really not remember anything? So they decide to take her on a girls' weekend at this really isolated hotel in the Catskills. And it all starts to unravel there. And it was honestly, I loved this. Like, I want to see a movie version of this and where it goes in the third act. It was a cool new horror concept that I had not seen before. So that is The Return by Rachel Harrison. I thought was just a really fun, tight, compelling listen that made me, it's one of those, like, I always listen on my commute. I can tell I'm enjoying it if I get home and I'm like, I'll do the dishes just so I can keep listening once I'm home. That's like a good sign. Elric, you have to start listening to audiobooks. I say that as I clap.
How do you do it? How do you start?
Listen to audiobooks. I said this when we were on break, but start with Nothing But Blackened Teeth. The narrator on that's really tight. It's a fast listen. It's a really tight story. So that was a really good kind of gateway. If you're not into audiobooks, start with Nothing But Blackened Teeth. It was a good one.
Okay, this year, before the year is over, I'm going to have listened to an audiobook, my first one.
You need to. You definitely need to. They changed my commute from me going, okay, I guess I'll listen to this podcast. Not that I have anything against podcasts. Keep listening to podcasts on your commute, but it let me mix it up a lot. And then once I was in on audiobooks, it kind of, my book, I always have this massive to watch DVD shelf, and I have an equally large to read bookshelf that sometimes gets so large, I literally just have to take books off of it and put them on my bookshelf, even though I've never read them. It let me kind of mitigate that and start decreasing it. So it's great. So audiobooks. Okay. What you got?
Wait, I'm done.
You're done.
We're ready for your number one.
That was The Return.
Oh, that is your number one.
We're number one. We're past it.
We've done it all.
Yeah, we have done it all. Well, you know what? Let's head into one of my other summer reads that I've about halfway through, so we can't get spoilery on this. But I'm excited to see where it goes. The first half has been phenomenal. Let's bring on Daniel Kraus with his new book, WHALEFALL. Hello and welcome back. I have been trying to get this next guest on for like years. Like, I have been geeking out about his books, his writing, his comic books. Elric and I had a couple of weeks last fall where we were obsessed with autumnal.
Right.
And finally with his new book, WHALEFALL, Daniel Kraus is joining us tonight. Welcome, sir.
It's been it's taken way too long for this to happen.
Oh my gosh. No,
it's been like 7 or 8 years, I feel like.
Yeah, Daniel, we've been corresponding. I think like we started over Twitter, just DMing each other about like projects and books, and I was geeking out over Rotters. And then somehow he listened to the show when I talked about Oak Island, my passion of like Curse of Oak Island. And then this blossomed into a long chain on the history of Oak Island and that TV show, which Elric has yet to watch.
Haven't done it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if I want to recommend it or not. The funny thing is I don't generally watch TV shows a lot. I watch tons and tons of movies, but hardly ever watch TV shows.
Same.
So it's a real peculiar thing that I've started watching Oak Island. I probably got it from you, Bekah.
I think one of your first emails about it to me was, I watched this because you kept talking about it on the show, and now I'm in and I'm hooked and I can't stop.
Yeah, and I think what I like about it is that what I like about it isn't the what you're supposed to be involved in. Like, I'm not all that concerned about if there's a treasure hidden on Oak Island. What I like about it is kind of the man versus nature element of it, and how there's like these people are destroying their finances, and generations of people are ruining their lives, digging these holes to nowhere. It's like this weird kind of metaphor of like the senselessness of humans trying to best the natural world.
You have thought about this so much more than I ever have, and I've been with it since season 1. I'm kind of in it for the treasure. Like, I like the history of the island, and every single time Gary finds a button or, some weird coin, I'm like, oh, this is it. But I'm also in it for I will watch rich guys dig holes in the ground until the end of time. And every single season now, I'm like, drop cans. Like, I'm not satisfied unless they're dropping cans into the ground. That's where they put these giant tubes down to try to dig everything out. Elric's falling asleep already.
No, Daniel's version of this sounds like a Terrence Malick movie. So now I'm like partially interested. His is like questioning the universe. And when you talk about it, it sounds like this like trash show that they need TV dinners for. So I'm not sure where to fall. So
it's both.
Okay. Hey, perfect.
It is. Yeah, it's all how you approach it.
It's everything. And no, I started watching this at season 1, and they've been doing this for like a decade now, and I will continue to watch them dig holes in the ground to find a button, and I'm so there for it. Or this last season, they found pottery shards, and I was like, pottery shards? And it's like everything on the show. So anyways, thus we digress into our weird little side hobby. So Daniel, before we dig into WHALEFALL, because I've been trying to talk to you for like a decade now, I want to go all the way back, because I read Rotters, which was one of your very first books, but you had one before that, right? Monster Variations. How did you get started? Like, what was the day that you were just like, fuck it, I'm going to write a novel? How did that come about?
Well, I mean, I grew up wanting to write novels, from really early age, from like first grade or something, but there wasn't, it's easier to forget, like back in those days, especially if you lived in a small Iowa town like I did, there was no path to that. Like, it was a complete fantasy. Like, it's not that I didn't know any artists, it's that I didn't know anyone who knew anyone who knew anyone who knew any artists. Like, it was like so far removed. So it was never really even though I was writing, full novels by high school, I was just writing them and putting them in a drawer and not even sharing them with anyone. It was just something I was doing for me, which has held me in good stead in my career, actually. Writing still just sort of for myself, and publishing being sort of just something that kind of has to happen with finances. But I actually, in my 20s, was involved in film. I was a documentary director, and I directed a bunch of documentaries that played on like PBS and stuff like that.
Nice.
So I actually have a semi background in film there. But even though I made those documentaries mostly alone, sometimes I'd have one crew member, it still wasn't like hermit enough for me. I really, really like working alone in my office. Like, that's just what I love. So I kind of burned out on that a little bit and was like, maybe I should go back to my first love. And I have, just sort of, I always hesitate to say this, but I had like the opposite of the hard luck publishing story. I wrote a first novel and I got lucky and it got published by Random House, and I've been in a decent shape ever since then.
Did you just blind submit it? Like, hey, I wrote this novel, and just message people from there? Like, how did you first find Random House?
Yeah, I mean, the key then and now is, not finding Random House, it's finding an agent. So I found an agent just through like the slush process. Yeah, just blind submission. And then
you give faith to that process, because every other person I know is like, don't even bother, they're not going to respond. And so, yeah, you just gave faith to that process.
I mean, you almost have to. Like, there are a few people out there who have managed it without agents, but like generally the big, now we're down to like five publishers.
Five publishers.
Like they're not going to accept anything that's not from an agent. So you have to have the agent first. They're the big gatekeeper. You don't ever have to worry about, or for good or bad, approaching a publisher, because they're not going to talk to you anyway. They're only going to talk to the agents. It's similar in Hollywood, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's pretty, you can survive in Hollywood without an agent or a manager, but it's a lot harder, I'll say. Yeah, there's definitely, it's a gatekeeper system. Yeah. So after Monster Variation comes out, I'd love to talk about Rotters, because this is one that, I've been in love with for a long time. I felt like it didn't get nearly enough acclaim, and I kept wanting a TV show. And so could you talk a little bit about where the concept for Rotters came out of? Because I find it so fast. It's about gravediggers. It's about a collection of gravediggers.
Well, more specifically, grave robbers.
Yeah, grave robbers.
In theory, gravediggers are just doing their job at
That's true.
cemetery.
No, these people are digging them back up. No, and it's kind of a father-son operation for part of it. So
yeah, it's about a modern day underground network of grave robbers, and they all operate in their own territories of the country, and they're almost like a knighthood. So it's not something that is, these are villains. These are actually, and that was part of the challenge of writing it, these are like knights, and their shovels are like their swords, and they have a code of ethics, and they approach digging bodies with a certain reverence, and the jewelry they take off of them, it all sort of works into their there's a whole mindset behind it. There's a whole again, code behind it. But there's this one rogue grave robber who sort of goes off and threatens to upend the whole system. So it was one of the, it didn't, it wasn't a bestseller or anything, but it did break my career open, definitely. Like it got a lot of attention from the right people. That's the book that Guillermo del Toro read and got him interested in me. So like it did open a lot of doors, and it continues to be one of my most popular books. It's the book that inspires the most tattoos by far. Like,
what do people get tattooed from that? Like the shovel, or is it like
they'll get shovels? I've seen there's a thing in the book called the Rotters book, which is Polaroids of bodies in the graves by this one rogue grave robber. So I'll get the book. I'll get there's a lot of icons in the book. Like I know someone who has this on her leg, like on her femur, is a broken femur, which there's this the boy in the book carries this broken femur of his mother with him from her grave. I mean, it's a lot, but for some reason it inspires tattoos. So I don't know why.
That feels like a Del Toro book, because it has this childlike fairy tale quality to it, even though it is about grave robbing. I can see him kind of gravitating towards that. How did your relationship with him expand into, Troll Hunter and the Shape of Water? Like, how did it keep going?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was no relationship at first. I guess you just read the book and liked it. I'm none the wiser, really. But at some point he had sold Troll Hunters, the novel, not the show, was adapted later from the novel, to Disney, and wanted a co-author for it. And I think Rotters was just kind of fresh in his mind, maybe, and it dealt with kids of kind of close to the same age. So he just contacted me my agent, and sort of told me, my agent, told me about what the project was and if I was interested. So I went up to Toronto. So he was shooting Pacific Rim up there, and we had a very now famous breakfast where we talked out troll hunters and got along great and really hit it off. And then sort of at some point in the breakfast, totally randomly, not expecting anything from it, I was like, "Oh, you'd love this idea I have about it's kind of like Creatures from the Black Lagoon, but it's like this janitor who breaks them out of a lab and puts them in her bathtub." So that breakfast was also the origin of Shape of Water.
Wow.
And he just, I remember he just kind of got quiet and said, "That's beautiful. I love that." And then I felt kind of cheesy, so I tried to get it back to Troll Hunters, but he kept trying to talk about this other thing. And so anyway, that's kind of the origin of that project.
How is he as a, I was just going to ask how he was as a collaborator. Is he because he's a visual director and a writer, is he largely talking out loud in your collaborations, or is he writing to you and then you're writing based on his writing?
Did you guys shift drafts back and forth, or was it more of kind of a talking collaboration?
It was different for both books. Shape of Water was a unique project in that it was something I was planning to write as a novel. It was an idea I had back when I was in elementary school. If you can believe that.
Wow.
And it just sort of carried along with me through the years, just that small premise that I just shared with you. And I mentioned to him sort of offhandedly, and he wanted to make it to a movie, but I didn't really think it was going to happen. So I kept sort of in the background developing it as a book. And eventually, all of a sudden, he got hot on it and started making it, started getting into pre-production on it. So this is really happening. So we decided that we would do the book and the movie simultaneously, more or less.
Wow.
So part of the book was the script that he was writing, and plus what I was already planning for the book. So the only thing I can kind of compare it to is 2001. So there's the Arthur C. Clarke put out 2001, the novel, sort of simultaneously with the movie. And they're both the same story, but there's sort of different approaches on it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very unique in that way.
I really want to ask, before we, kind of get into like the art of writing, you got to do something cool that a lot of writers do not get to do. You got to finish a book for somebody who had passed away. You got to do the rest of the George Romero novel. What was that like, to kind of pick up a partially finished novel and get to keep going with it? And how did you even begin to figure out where to go? This is The Living Dead, which was the unfinished George Romero novel that you finished and released in 2018. That's like a hell of an honor.
Yeah, I mean, Romero was my favorite artist, period, in any medium.
I will say, I'm going to jump in, because when you talked about Rotters a few minutes ago, I was about to say the way you described the characters in Rotters made me think of Knight Riders.
Yeah,
and so
right.
As you were talking, I was like, the honor and the system and the.
That's such a good comp for it, actually.
So funny,
you should read Rotters. You would.
No,
really
I remember
like
you talking about it years ago on the older show, so I got it right.
Well, what's crazy is I've never had that thought before, but you're right.
It was the language you were using to talk about the way they work together. I was like, oh, that reminds me of how I felt about Knight Riders.
Yeah, man,
that's a great comp. Yeah, I never thought of that. I'm embarrassed, but anyway, So I grew up on Romero, like literally, like I saw Night of the Living Dead when I was 5 or 6 years old, and they just played it constantly, of course, because of the copyright thing. And when Romero died, he about a month after he died, his wife and manager contacted me to see if I'd be willing to take a whack at finishing this epic zombie novel that he'd been working on for years. And I mean, there's kind of two parts to that conversation. One is just, the practicality of it. I was actually aware of this because every once in a while in interviews, he'd reference it, that I'm working on this book. So it was vaguely on my radar. But it had been a few years since I'd heard about it. I certainly wasn't thinking about it when he died. And then the second thing is just sort of how stunned I was then, and really still am now. It's the one thing in my career that is like, it was, I always say it wasn't a dream because it's so beyond what I could have conceived of as a young fan. Because the book essentially kind of closes the loop of the 6 films he made.
Oh.
In a way, the novel, which is quite huge, the way it's structured is there's sort of the first, it's kind of in 3 acts. There's sort of the first act, and then you could slot the 6 films kind of right after the first act, and then there's the second and third act. And as a sort of side note to the side note, I think I'm the first person who ever really put the films into chronological order. Like, there's the order that they were released, but that's separate from the order in which they take place. And that was important because once I put them in sort of story order, which is, I think, Night, Diary. It's been a while since I've done this list.
I've never even thought about that they are kind of in the same universe happening in a different order. I kind of just took them in chronological order.
Yeah, I've actually have it right here. Okay, it's Night, Diary, Survival, Dawn, Land, and Day. So that's the actual order. And some of those are contextual clues. Sometimes the movie will say, someone in the movie will say, it's been 5 years since the zombie outbreak. A couple of them were harder to find. I had to go to the novelization of Dawn, I think, or the script of one of them to figure it out. But eventually I puzzled it together. And once you've done that, you can start to trace the actual evolution of zombies versus sort of the more piecemeal version of how he's releasing them. And that, now that I had correctly plotted points 1 through 6, I could then start to better theorize points 7, 8, and 9, or whatever. So he had left notes on what was missing from the book, but there was still a ton that he didn't leave notes on. So it really inevitably had to be a real Romero Kraus joint because there just wasn't enough there. I still had to make a lot of leaps, but I approached it like I was finishing the Sistine Chapel or something. I took it like super, super seriously and did so much research into not just him as a filmmaker, but him as a human being. Like I did extensive interviews with people who knew him and his wife and really tried to, one of the things I did was try to learn what his favorite things were. Like famously, he loved the opera Tales of Hoffmann, but what other movies and books and music did he love? And then I would consume those and try to figure out what was George seeing in these works of art that he liked so much, and what can I then draw from them to try to get into his head a little bit.
You're a profiler, like FBI profiler, but for a novelist. I love it.
Yeah.
What was kind of the wildest one that, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, but that he loves this movie or this TV show? Was there one that was just like, oh my God, he's so into Desperate Women. He's been watching that or Designing Women. He's been watching that for years.
No, there was nothing like that. He certainly did not partake in horror almost ever. Like he never, I think, when he was a kid or a young man, before making Night, he watched some horror stuff, but as sort of an adult, he never watched or read horror. He was really, to sum him up in just the simplest way, he was sort of your TCM guy. Like he would always have that on in the background. He loved Westerns, Ben-Hur, just sort of like these kind of classic Hollywood things. But I think it's what made him such a great horror filmmaker, because he was completely out of the horror feedback loop. He wasn't interested in horror, which conversely sort of made him a more interesting horror guy, I think.
There was quite a few back then like that, like Friedkin and people who were just great filmmakers, and they took an interest in horror. And I think they did all have in common their childhood love of horror. And I think that is a powerful emotion to come back to at any time. It's always there, I think. So
yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I love Romero too, so deeply. Just one of those filmmakers where maybe it's because his films are a little more handmade than a lot of other directors, and so I think his personality always has come through his work, which is just great. Of the Dead films, do you have a personal favorite? And also wondering, of the latter ones, is there one that you would tell people to maybe go back and visit? Because I think sometimes they came out in a vacuum, or found footage is being done to death, and Diary comes out.
Diary didn't do well because of that.
Yeah. I mean, sort of my sentimental favorite is Night, obviously. But Night, I always say, is less a movie to me than it is a song. It's like almost like an album you love. Like I can just play it and sort of endlessly, and it means things to me that are beyond the actual text. Of the original trilogy, I really like Day. The one that I always wave a flag for is Survival. I really, really like Survival of the Dead. I think it was destined to sort of miss the target Romero audience, but then again, most of his films did that too. Where it's so, particularly Survival has such a light hand in a way. Like he really was trying to make a Western, and it feels, I think, to anyone going in there looking for Dawn, and that's what most Romero people always wanted, was another Dawn. It feels insignificant, but it's a wonderful movie. There's so much to be plumbed there, that would, you'd have to kind of go back and watch it. We come back and talk.
about it. You're making, that's kind of why I asked, because those ones I only saw when they first came out, and they didn't make as big an impression in the moment, because I was still, from Bruiser on, I was a little bit, like, oh
yeah, sure.
Plus, it was right around the same time as 28 Days Later, becoming 28 Weeks Later, and we were seeing a completely different breed of zombies. And I remember going from that to like a Diary, and suddenly it's just, kind of a weird statement on texting and being online, but the zombies kind of went back to the original conceit. And I remember being kind of like, but we run now. They run. And that being kind of a weirder thing.
I mean, really, if you haven't seen Diary in a while, it's tremendous. I had the same sort of reaction when it came out. I was a little disappointed. It was okay, but it doesn't, compared to something like Blair Witch or whatever, it doesn't feel real in that way. But wow, talk about like a classic Romero predicting 10 years into the future. Like what it has to say about like how we're living now is amazing.
So that's the one takeaway that I still have now, is that and I haven't seen it since it first came out in the 2000 aughts, I want to say, late aughts, but that it was all about like, nobody's really even bothering going out anymore. It's just all about living online and talking about the zombies online and things like that. And it feels like that's where we are. Even outside of the pandemic, it's still just, I'm not going to go experience politics. I'll just talk about them online and things like that.
Yeah, it's almost like a thesis film for him, which where it feels, I can understand a watcher not getting into the energy of it like maybe some of the original films, but there's so many ideas going on in it. It's definitely worth a rewatch.
What of your work was it that got you the attention of Romero's family? Which piece in particular was it that got you that?
I had just come off of the 2 collaborations with Guillermo, and Shape of Water was a big one. Everyone was sort of aware of that project. So I'm guessing it was that I had, I don't really know specifically, but I had done a couple collaborations that had gone well. And I had met his manager, or I had drinks with his manager sort of randomly. The one time I met George in person 10 years before that. And I must have impressed upon him like what a student I was of Romero. And importantly, and this is important to the family, not necessarily his zombie films, like those 2, but I was also just as into his non-zombie films, which I think if you're
Season of the Witch and Martin are brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So
yeah. I don't think he's ever made a bad film. I'm sure we could argue about that, but so that helped, I think. But I honestly don't know. There were more obvious choices, but the only thing I can say for myself is I don't know that they could have found him who would have worked as hard as I did.
That's great.
That's a beautiful thing.
And didn't you end up writing some Creepshow too later?
Yeah, I did 2 episodes of the TV show. Yeah.
Nice. So there's a nice continuity.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
So going back to kind of your kind of novels that come out of nowhere, what is your process? Like, I'm always fascinated, but like, we've asked Grady Hendrix, we've asked Stephen Graham Jones, we've asked every writer that comes on the show, Paul Tremblay, where once you have an idea, once it's just, hey, coalition of grave robbers, where do you start? How do you kind of get going? Do you just jump right in and start writing? Are you an outliner? You know, what's your process? And then even kind of, what is your day to day? Do you sit down and write for 8 hours? Do you finish the whole novel in a week? Do you, do 500 words a day and it takes you a year? Kind of, what's your process for it?
Yeah. As far as like the planning of it, as Shape of Water reveals, and it's not the only one, sometimes my ideas take decades to figure out. I've had 2 of my books came from elementary school, I think. So usually what happens is I have these, these little notebooks over here. And I'll just write the ideas down. And what usually has to happen is I have to have a collision of 2 ideas. And that's usually the book's premise. And that first idea can exist, when I'm in elementary school, but it might take decades for the thing to hit it and kind of make a spark. And that's the book. My process is I'm very non-precious about it. I just work like I'm at a factory. I wake up, I sit down right here at this screen, and I work all day. I write as much as I can. For most of my career, I've written every free hour. Let's say 5 or 6 years ago, I agreed to take Sundays off, which is still difficult for me, but I'm getting better at it.
Do you do 8-hour days?
Yes.
That's impressive.
And some days, those last few hours will be business. Like, I've just got business emails I have to attend to. But so I do 6 days a week now.
Oh my gosh.
But this isn't unpleasant for me. This is what I want to be doing all the time. It really is, like I said, when I was a kid and I was just writing, putting things in a drawer, there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. It's really super enjoyable for me to write. Like, this is a slight exaggeration, but like when a book actually comes out, I wouldn't call it an annoyance, but it's like, it's not something I really get excited about. Like, I have to kind of pause and, promote it a little bit or whatever. But it doesn't do anything for me, really. Like, it's just the writing. I could probably be happy as a Salinger type character who just stops publishing. And if I was independently wealthy and just put all my books into a cabinet for them to publish after I'm dead. That's my process. I am an outliner, though. It kind of counterintuitively, I find that it for me anyway, frees me up, actually. To sort of to know where the points are, allows me on a daily basis to let go of worrying about where it's going and just kind of go wild with the actual prose, because I sort of know the next point where that's going to be. So today I don't have to think about it. I can just go crazy. And
do you have to have the entire outline before you can even begin writing, or could you have the bulk of it and then start?
There is often a sort of test period where I have the notion, and I want to see if I can kind of fall in love with it. So I'll write X number of pages. It could be 10 pages, it could be 50, just making sure that it's something I want to, particularly if it's very complicated or very long, before I spend oodles of time outlining, because I do intensive outline. My outlines themselves can be 50 pages, So there might be a little bit of free writing sort of at the beginning. And then I've had the inverse happen where I've outlined something extensively. I've got this Western that I've been beating my head against the wall for a decade now, where I have multiple outlines and have read dozens and dozens of books. And every time I try to write it, I write 1 or 2 pages. And I'm like, nope, still not right. Still, I don't have the voice.
Most writers I know have rewritten the same project like 6 times and then are still fighting. And it's the one that they will continue to rewrite. So yeah. So let's dig into WHALEFALL. So my first question with this one, this seems like it's meticulously researched because you are getting so much into kind of the science of being underwater, of the squid, of the whale itself, of the internal anatomy of how the actual descent would work. Who did you talk to and how much research did you do? Like, I assume there's interviews involved in this.
Yeah, I did all the research.
That's amazing.
That's how much, all of it. I don't know anything about whales. Like, this is like the absolute opposite of right what you know, like I didn't know anything about whales. I didn't know particularly know that much about the ocean. I certainly didn't know anything about diving. So I was starting at nil. So the first step was to contact whale scientists, basically, and ask them. I'm skipping some steps here. It's all in the author's note if you listeners want to read it in more detail. But essentially, question one was, could someone really be swallowed? And it turns out they could if it's a sperm whale. If the diver was kind of slender and the sperm whale was particularly large, sperm whales have these giant, big throats because they are eating squid all day. Whereas most other most other whales have these tiny little throats that could never swallow you. So when you see these videos of people kind of ending up in whale mouths, generally those are humpback whales. There's no chance of them being swallowed. And all the headlines that say kayakers swallowed by whales are misleading. They've been mouthed by whales, which is, I'm not discounting how scary that would be, but it's not the same as being swallowed. So basically, spent about 3 months. So I had to front load all the research because there's not really any books about this. Just interviewing scientists and kind of inch by inch figuring out what inside of a whale is like. And so I would say, okay, you're in the stomach. What's right here? What does it look like? What does it smell like? What happens if you touch it? Could you move this way? And what's over there? And so this kind of arduous process of figuring out the stomach and the throat and the mouth and all that, and starting to piece together what was possible inside a stomach. Like what question two after was it possible was like, is there any air in there? Turns out there's not. So that meant the diver had to be a scuba diver, would have to have their own air supply. So the whole book takes place in about 90 minutes. The diver, once he's swallowed, has about 1 hour of air left. So the bulk of the book is that 1 hour of trying to get out. And the methods he attempts were, I could never come up with because I don't know enough. They were sort of collaborative brainstorms with the scientists, and the things they came up with were just fantastic.
There's this whole opening scene, which is honestly one of my favorite parts, where the squid is trying to pull him in and then the whale comes up. And
so essentially, to sort of explain that, a sperm would never willingly swallow a person. It had to be an accident. And the scientists basically led me to the conclusion that whale eats squid is entangled with person, and that's the path in, which of course adds another problematic element for being in the stomach, is now there's a giant squid in there with you. And a whale stomach is like not a Pinocchio scenario. There's no, it's not like an auditorium where you can just sort of chill out and live your life. It's like an elastic sleeping bag. So it's very tight, but you can kind of push it around a little bit. And the whale stomach is where the whale chews. It doesn't chew with its teeth. So you're getting crushed by all this 500 pounds of pressure. And there's a giant squid in there with razor suckers on its tentacles. It's one thing after another.
Stuff. Amazing. Absolutely amazing beak action in this.
Yeah, it's good.
Were you a Pinocchio kid or a Moby Dick? I mean, Moby Dick, whether it's film or book, a lot of us were inundated at a young age with it in classes, especially. But did either of them have a particularly significant effect or not really?
No. I mean, I had never read Moby Dick before starting this book. As soon as I decided to do it, I read it right away and really liked it.
Yeah, amazing.
Pinocchio didn't, I saw it and remembered it, but it didn't have any overly large influence on my life.
Yeah. Moby Dick is one of those ones that the ideas in it you can become kind of obsessed by. There's just like the story itself, but there's a pretty good John Huston version that I remember watching once, going, "Oh, it's pretty interesting." But
is that the one with Gregory Peck?
Yeah, Gregory Peck.
Yeah, like I watched all the Moby Dicks too, and there's a bunch, and I don't particularly like any of them, but I always love the whales. Like the whales in every version of Moby Dick are awesome. I could do without the rest of the movies, but the whale in the John Huston version is so great.
Kind of quality. Yeah, the color and stuff is really cool. Yeah,
great monsters.
As a kid, I had seen Pinocchio and everything, and of course knew the story. I'd seen the Disney cartoon. Even though that they call it a whale in it, and its name's Monstro, the whale, for some reason, I had always thought it was a shark, because being part of Jaws generation, sharks eat people, not whales. And it wasn't until years later when I was on the ride at Disney World in Florida when I was like, that's a whale. And suddenly it hit me that it was not a shark eating people, because that's just where my mind had always went. And even now, the one here at Disneyland that I'm more familiar with, they have this really cool part of the ride where it kind of rises up and you actually go into the whale. It's really cool the way that they
no kidding.
It's a cool part of the ride. They also have this thing with Pinocchio where they get captured and taken to Pleasure Island, where they actually go into the cage and it spins you around inside the cage, and then you keep going. It's a pretty cool part of it. So, but the whale part definitely. But okay, so WHALEFALL comes out, and this like sold out, right? Like there was a point where you could not find copies of this, correct?
Yeah, that was. I don't know how to feel about that. Like it it's good and bad, like it essentially, except for Amazon and Barnes and Noble, who handle their own distribution in some magical way. It became impossible to get after one day. So, which sounds good. Like they reprinted it 4 times in 4 days, trying to catch up to demand. But the downside of that, of course, is no bookstores had it for a good week or so. Mom and pop bookstores, so nobody. I just got deluged with we can't find it, and my bookstore doesn't have it, they're all sold out, they can't acquire it. So that was kind of a bummer, but yeah, it was the demand was obviously nice to see.
How does that even happen in the modern age? Is it through, like, in terms of the awareness of the book before it hits, and so there's an interest in it? Is it based on your previous work, do you think, or was there something in the story that had been publicized that would get people excited? I'm always just curious, because publishing has changed just so much, and the bookstore's kind of been coming back in the last few years, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on with this book. Like, it was on, the big thing I think was it was on the front cover of the New York Times Book Review, and that's like to this day, that's a big deal. So that, I think, probably drove a lot of attention of literary types. And it had a few other hits, and of course, it was optioned for a film. That always drives a little bit of attention. So I think it hit enough of these things, but mostly I think it's just word of mouth regarding the premise. Like the premise does something to people. It always has.
This actually came up in a meeting that I was in yesterday about the importance of a log line that you can sum up in like 6 words or less. And Dude Trapped in Whale does it. Like that is it right there. And so it's like that perfect log line. It's such a cool, just concise premise that as soon as you hear that, you're like, okay, I'm in.
Yeah. And I've never had a book that I could sum up in a sentence before. Usually if you ask me what my book is, I mumble for a minute and never really figure it out. But you can sum this up in one sentence, and it works. I think there's something, it triggers something in the brain, like some primordial part of our brain where we remember, when we were early human beings and we might be eaten and swallowed by things. We actually had to worry about that, and over time that fear has gone away, but it's still in there, part of our brain. And this premise, you even before I wrote the book, I would tell certain people, I'm thinking about doing this book on this, and they would just like, something would just activate them. Like they would understand the stakes immediately. There's a reason this is one of our oldest stories. Like it just does something to us. And what was so shocking to me when I first came up with the premise is that no one had done it before. Like people had done lots of person inside whale in sort of metaphorical or magical realism type of ways, but nobody had ever taken it seriously in a scientific way.
And I'm now realizing, like, I was immediately thinking, Moby Dick. And now I'm like, Jonah and the Whale, this is such an old story. It's biblical. But yeah, we've never seen the horror version of it before.
Yeah, it blew my mind.
Yeah. So I'm sure you can't say much about the option, but it was Ron Howard's company, right?
Yes, it was Imagine.
That is awesome. So any plans, or is it just it's been optioned and that's kind of where it's at because of the strike and everything? At this
Unfortunately, that's where it's at. You know, it's sort of when it happened, it was right at the time where we had to stop talking.
Yeah.
So that's all that is known at the moment.
That's okay. It's there and it's simmering, and that's all I need to get my next aquatic horror film. So I'm anxious for it. So now that this is out, you've just completed the book tour on this one. Kind of, are you back to, or you got a couple more stops?
I got a lot more stops actually. But I did the first leg, which was the intensive part. So that's where you're going city to city, and flying every single day. And that part's over.
So kind of, without telling us what the book is, what's the new research obsession? Like, what's the next thing that you're just like, oh, I'm calling these people and really diving into this every day?
What I wrote directly after WHALEFALL is a science fiction book.
Nice.
Really science fiction horror. Like it is kind of the most horrifying thing I've ever written, but technically it's science fiction.
Challenge accepted. Okay.
So that was a whole different kind of task. There was a lot of research just about the cosmos, you know, like when inventing. It's not like WHALEFALL is, as far as me and my scientists can determine, is 100% scientifically accurate. It sounds like I'm describing the human centipede here. But that's not the case with the sci-fi book, but I tried to get kind of close. So I was trying to understand to some degree, like quantum physics and quarks, black holes, you name it. I was trying to have a basis in reality. It's not as specific as a whale, and every day was its own new sort of investigation. I don't think I've gone hardcore into one topic like the whale since the whale, but it hasn't been that long. So I will soon, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We like deep cuts here. If you listen to this, do you have a recommendation, a film recommendation for the people? Doesn't have to be for us. It could be saying you love a film has gone under your skin over the years.
Deep cut film. I'll take a deep cut book as well, because I know you're an avid reader too.
I have been waiting for this question for
That's why years. I wasn't going to let you off the hook. I knew.
And there's so much I could say. And first of all, you can cut this out if you want, but may I just take this moment to thank both of you for doing this show and for doing.
Why would we cut this out?
No, we're keeping this in. This
is
the good stuff. Keep it.
And for doing deep cuts, especially. I am, truly someone who seeks out the deepest and weirdest stuff, and
kindred spirit.
And definitely. You guys are one of the few people who will mention things that I don't know. And that's really rare and highly valued. And, listening to you guys over the years, and,
particularly
particularly during the pandemic, was such a joy.
Oh,
and
that's great. Appreciate
it. Thank you.
It actually means a lot to me, your show. So I'm really thankful
nice.
to you guys for doing what you do. That aside, schmaltz aside,
I'm not tearing up here, Daniel. This is like a serious thing here. So yeah,
We just
you.
assume no one listens. We just could do this
Yeah.
together to see each other and talk about movies.
That's the weirdest thing is Elric and I would do this whether anybody listens or
Right.
not, because
Probably.
we've
We
discovered
probably would.
we'll go meet at coffee shops and this is still what it devolves into, is just
Especially
like
deep cuts.
yeah, deep cuts. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I watched this thing. I found this weird thing out of Hong Kong. We should watch next week. And so it's like
Yeah.
it's happening with or without the show. The fact that people listen, we're just honored to have here.
Particularly deep cuts is
Yeah.
something I never would miss.
you.
So there's a lot I could say here, and we could go on and on depending on how deep you want to get. But I did want to mention one filmmaker who I don't think a lot of people know about.
I have my notebook ready to go. I'm ready to
and
write.
let's see if you guys know him. His name is Brian Pollan. Okay.
Doesn't jump out straight away.
All right, so he's this guy who's for the past, I want to say 10 or 15 years, has been making homemade movies in, from what I can tell, his garage and his basement. These are like zero budget, shot on video, all they're just all like gore films, but with incredible technique. Like, you know, you can tell it's rubber and silicone and all that. But the heart that this guy puts into these movies, which are just disgusting, the effects in their own way are truly stunning. And every time he puts on a movie, I buy it. You can't go wrong with any of his stuff. My favorite of his movies is called Fetus. But the trick with Brian Pollan is, and I don't know why this is his movies are very difficult to find, which is kind of part of the charm. You have to kind of go to his website, which frequently doesn't seem to work, and order the DVDs directly from him.
Wow, he's creating his own demand. This is brilliant.
And sometimes you'll try to order a movie and it won't work. So then I would suggest then just emailing him and say, I tried to order this movie. So it's like there's sort of these roadblocks to getting to his movies, and they're not going to be everyone's cup of tea, to say the least. But I'm just fascinated by them, and for movies that are so relentlessly disgusting, I find them kind of moving in a way. Like
Nice.
they're so, he believes in what he's doing so intensely, without regard to commercial success or really mass interest. But he's always one-upping himself with effects. And now I'm going to do more. I'm doing more. And I don't know who's watching these things besides me. But
how did you find, like, how did you first find any of his work?
I wish I could tell you. I can't remember.
Yeah,
it was I 6 or 7 years ago. I feel like it somehow someone was talking about like really, really off the map stuff, and Brian Pollan came up, and I wrote it down.
Yeah.
And then realized I couldn't find any of the stuff, and took a risk and just ordered it from this site that seemed slightly suspicious. But
is Fetus a good one to jump in on? Because I
yeah,
looked at that picture and it's like, okay, I could watch this.
Yeah, I would start with that. You'll know pretty quickly if it's for you or not.
Right.
I'm Googling this like right now, and I am so intrigued. You know how much we love our regional horror. So this just kind of speaks to all of that.
Especially people who can keep doing it. Like, I mean, what you were saying about anyone who can continue a cycle, that's fascinating. Yeah.
He's uber regional, like his garage regional. But I really can't get enough of this guy. And I would love to bring more attention to him.
You just did.
Yeah.
It just happened.
Okay, he's suddenly going to get like a boom on his website when it works, and it's going to be like, what the heck? So
yeah, I'm going to probably
it's going to be Elric and I, and that's it. That's us.
Or we're all going to get a bunch of emails saying, what were you talking? I ordered this and I can't stand it, but
you won't know till you try.
That's okay.
There will be some people out there like me who this just hits every trigger of, especially if you like made movies as a kid yourself or something, like this is just gonna blow your head off.
Well, that's what I like about the Bleeding Skull book. It's like, 80% of them are going to be unwatchable, but they're fascinating to hunt for some of those. And just there's so many different types of movies in there. So
that's why I love Vinegar Syndrome so much, is they will release stuff that I'm like, I don't know if it's good or not, but I've never seen it. And now I'm watching it. And so I end up watching everything, and they're hit or miss, but sometimes I find amazing gems in there, and that's wonderful.
I'm not a huge movie collector, but the one label that I buy everything from is Bleeding Skull. Because that, again, that's just my wheelhouse. I love regional filmmaking.
Love it too.
Did you see, before we go, did you see that we talked about a little while ago, a documentary about the website order horror, where you would say, I need a girl being carried by a monster, and the guys would make you these movies, and it was all through the 2000s. I think it's called The Murder Wave or something. It's on Tubi.
No.
It's freaking, it's so your jam. It couldn't be more your jam, trust me.
The Murder Wave?
I think it's Murder Wave. It was really cool because it was just like this very popular, this guy who ran this site for, a couple decades, where people write their fetishes, horror film version fetishes, and he made these little short horror films.
He'd go make movies for them. And they would pay for it. It's wild. It's absolutely wild.
Well,
did you see Star Time? That was like my favorite one from last year. That was like totally like a Vinegar Syndrome, like Bleeding Skull-esque.
I still need to see that one too.
It's on my list because you have mentioned it a few times.
Yeah.
And I haven't found it. Is it on Tubi?
I watched it it was streaming on they have like a linear channel that they play through Night Flight. And that's where I happened upon it. But I think that there is a DVD release of it. I'm fairly sure.
I think I stumbled upon it recently, and I was like, oh, I remembered you talking. Okay, here's the title: Mail Order Murder, and then the story of Wave Productions, and it's W.A.V.E. And that's so. I hadn't even heard of Wave Production. I hadn't heard of any of this. Stumbled upon it, and I was like, it's not perfect, but man, is it like. It's just cool. It's like, I wish I had been around when he was in his peak. I would have done it. I would have paid for somebody to make me a weird horror fetish film. And the number one is Monsters Carrying Woman is like the number one, or Woman in Quicksand is another one that he had to do.
Woman in Quicksand.
I love Woman in Quicksand. I'm like, that's so cool.
It's so specific.
Dreaming of that for years.
It's so specific. It's weird. It reminds me of, and I grew up in this, like, as I mentioned, a small town in Iowa, but it was a little bit after I went to college, but this production company came into town, and I always wish someone had made a documentary about this production company. They don't exist anymore, apparently. But their business model was you could hire them. They would come to your small town, and they would write and produce a movie featuring your townspeople.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
And create a feature film. These generally weren't horror films. They weren't genre films, really. But what a weird concept. And and talking about movies that are off the map, because the only people who buy them are the people who are in these small towns.
God, I'd love to go to a festival of all of those. Like,
oh my gosh!
Watch them,
Now I need a documentary on that. So yeah, some of our documentary filmmakers listening, find that.
It also sounds like how Wes Anderson will win his next Oscar making that movie, because you can just see him his troupe rolling into town, making a movie in the Wes Anderson way.
Well, remember when Steven Soderbergh made Bubble?
And I covered Bubble.
And I remember, like, and maybe he was being facetious when he said this, but he, at the time, I remember reading an interview with him, said, like, this is going to be what I do now. I'm going to go to towns, cast locally, and make movies like that. And he only ever made Bubble like that, but I was I loved that idea.
It sounds like State and Maine, which is a movie that has not held up kind of like, politically correctness. But I remember that movie. I don't even remember when State and Maine came out, but it was about them like rolling into town, into this tiny little town, and Philip Seymour Hoffman trying to write the town and everything. So
it's a cool idea. It's a cool idea. I like it.
Before we leave, hit us with a really good book or graphic novel that you've read recently.
Ooh, I should have came prepared for this. This one's always tough because I don't read a ton of like super recent stuff. I tend to read all over the place.
It's okay. It can be an old one.
I'm going to go with my kind of de facto answer to this. These days is this writer named Maurice Meyer. Meyer's like Meijer. And she's one of my favorite writers right now. She is she's not online, which makes her practically a Brian Pollan. She's mysterious and untraceable. But she's written a few books of short stories and one novel which I just blew me away, called The Seventh Mansion. That is in some ways kind of about necrophilia, kind of, but is a really, really beautiful book. And that again is another real sweet spot for me. And stuff, and kind of what I've modeled my career after, or tried to, is to take something that's really appalling, grave robbing would be a great example, and trying to turn it into something kind of beautiful, or see how far I can push it and still maintain a reader's sympathy for what's happening. So I'm a big, huge fan of The Seventh Mansion.
I feel like Symmetry Man does that a little bit. I always thought, as a movie, it's quite beautiful and quite sexy, but it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It should be the opposite of all those things.
It's weird. I look back at that movie and I see it almost as a romance film every single time. And then you stop and think about what it's about and you're like, okay. But it's so romantic and beautiful and fairy tale-ish.
Yeah, I love that trick, where you get the audience going with an idea that they really shouldn't, and suddenly they may or may not wake up at some point and say, wait a minute, how am I rooting for this? That's my favorite thing to do or to have done to me.
That's great.
That is beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. What is the next stop on the book tour?
This weekend I'm going to Maine, actually. Nice. So I have a few events in Bangor, Maine.
Hey, you just swing by that King mansion, wave from the driveway. Yeah, that's
King.
awesome.
I'll look it up. I'll look that guy up.
Yeah, he's I guess he's known in Bangor, Maine.
He's
regional.
He's a regional writer, right?
Regional writer. I'm sure that the locals know him. It's cool. So.
Okay. I'll check it out.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Daniel. We will have you back for the next one. I can't wait for the cosmic one.
Yes, let's not make it another 10 years.
Another 10 years.
Come back about movies. We'll just get you all about some movies you love.
Hell yeah. We'll bring you on Deep Cut. We never have guests on Deep Cut. We should totally do that.
I had nothing but deep cuts.
We'll bring you on Deep Cuts and we can just totally geek out. So yeah, we'll set that up. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And for those of you at home, feel free, if you just need a show during our off weeks, feel free to go to Deep Cuts, our Patreon show, where we get all types of weird and just all types of stuff that Elric and I see that we can't find anywhere else.
This is our new stuff. That's our weird old stuff. That's how we break it down. Yeah,
definitely. So thank you all so much for listening. We will be back in 2 weeks.